Let's go live now to the Shadow Business Minister for Small Business, Tim Wilson. Tim, great to see you. I want to talk about Jim Chalmers yesterday at the National Press Club. He's talking about the ability to actually get some kind of tax reform done with their majority in the House, but he wants to do this with building consensus. What are you willing to come to the table on? What can the major parties work together on here?
Well, I think the most important thing for the Treasurer right now is to build trust with the Australian community. We know before the last election we had Labor members of Parliament, or Labor candidates, now Labor members of Parliament, who said to their electorates that the family savings tax on unrealised capital gains wasn't part of their plan. They got elected. They're now going to go on and vote for a family savings tax. So the most critical thing right now is Jim Chalmers has a massive credibility and trust gap with the Australian public on these issues if he wants to see a conversation around reform, because we've always been consistent. We believe in lower, simpler, fairer taxes for the Australian community, but we've seen what Labor did when they were last in government. They had these summits where they brought people together and they had a pre-planned agenda. They got everybody in the room and they strong-armed them into things like industrial relations reform that they didn't want, that's hampered business, harmed the economy, harmed growth, harmed jobs creation. And I suspect that they're going to try and do the same thing again.
Oh, the Conservatives have never held just a talk fest with no outcomes, have they? Ever?
Well, we've always been focused on what we need to do to build the future of the Australian economy.
Sure.
But we've always found it challenging to get Labor on board with what we need to do to grow the pie, because their focus has always been to divide the pie. Sometimes it is challenging to get agreement. But that's why getting trust is so critical to a conversation around tax reform. And when you have Labor candidates who are now Labor members of Parliament say literally to their own voters that they wouldn't introduce a family savings tax on unrealised capital gains and are now going to vote for it in the House of Representatives, you have a massive credibility gap that cascades all the way through to future reform.
What reform has your side of politics actually achieved since John Howard brought in the GST?
Well, we've actually achieved lots of different reform, whether it's looking at making sure we have stopped the boats, secure border security. That's
I'm talking about tax reform. I'm talking about I'm talking about actual proper economic reform that is across the board and not just tinkering in some areas. I mean, don't you agree here, Tim, that this could be a golden opportunity to actually get something done? Are you going to let the perfect be the enemy of the good here?
So firstly, Laura, border security isn't tinkering. It's incredibly important. Just like delivering one of the 4 greatest social reforms in Australian history around equality before law through marriage equality was a significant achievement. Just like building out the future of Australia's defence capacity. Just like lowering personal income tax rates, which we also did during the last coalition government,
can I ask
was
you,
also an important part of the conversation.
Ever since we saw the Henry tax review, for example, we've talked about all these inefficient taxes, whether they be taxes like, stamp duty. I know they are state taxes, but I mean, for example, would you countenance at least a conversation and debate about raising the GST and getting rid of some of those inefficient taxes? Do you think that conversation is beyond us?
Well, that's for the Treasurer to start that conversation. They got elected to government. They have to put these proposals on the table and have to enter into the conversation in good faith. But a critical part of them being able to do so is actually having the credibility with the Australian people and a trust with the Australian people. And that's why they're already hampered by their Labor candidates telling their own voters untruths in the lead up to this election. And they haven't just got it on the taxes they want to propose, they've also got on the taxes they've already proposed. So when we're talking about tax reform for the future, we of course will have any conversation. We're interested in what they've got to put forward on the table. But when they're going to introduce a tax that some people even said they wouldn't, they have a really big problem in starting this conversation to take the whole of the Australian community forward together.
Just quickly on AI, because I talk about this uphill and down dale, and I think it's really important to keep this in the mix each and every single day when you're talking about productivity. I think the unions really pushing for more regulation to say AI can't even be used in certain jobs is a problem. But then it does need to be guardrails, doesn't there?
Well, we should be looking at what institutions we need to build to shape the direction of AI. It's frankly Luddite thinking to say that AI isn't going to be integrated into the future of the workplace. And I think, frankly, it's hilarious to watch people in, IT space or IT jobs argue that IT shouldn't be incorporated because it might transcend what they've traditionally done. The reality is AI is coming whether we want it or not.
Yeah.
If Australians don't engage with it, it will ultimately mean companies from overseas will become more competitive than us. So the conversation is how we build out the future of the employment market to make people ready for it, but of course to build competitive and resilient jobs and companies to be part of the conversation. But also, what do we need to do to build out the mechanism to support people through the transition and the change? And so it's both an exciting opportunity, but it's also one that is also challenging. And the unions only have a early 20th century, 19th century solution to this problem. We're looking at policy solutions about how we're going to build the 21st century of the Australian economy.
Tim Wilson, good to see you. Speak soon.